Chosen one, give me 3 undistracted minutes before you decide whether this message belongs to you. Not because heaven closes a door when 3 minutes expire. Not because God is threatening you. I am asking because sincere people often miss one pattern when they believe they are waiting on God. Here is the pattern. You receive a moment of clarity. You know who you need to call. You know what needs to end. You know which idea refuses to leave you alone. For a few seconds, everything feels simple. Then your mind starts producing alternatives, doubts, warnings, and reasons to delay what felt obvious only moments before. What if I misunderstood? What if I moved too early? What if God meant something else? What if people think I am foolish? Within minutes, clarity becomes fog. Then you do something that feels spiritual. You ask for another sign, another confirmation, because waiting feels safer than moving. Chosen one, this is the first revelation. Sometimes, asking for another sign is not discernment. Sometimes, it is fear wearing sacred clothing. If that sentence describes even one important area of your life, stay with me, because the real issue may not be a lack of direction. It may be what happens after direction arrives. A promise and the ability to receive a promise are not the same thing. An opportunity and the ability to recognize an opportunity are not the same thing. A calling and the clarity required to carry that calling are not the same thing. There can be a space between what you sense and what you can act on. I call that space the receiver gap. It is the distance between knowing and moving, between sensing and responding. Once you see that gap, something painful becomes hopeful, because not every delay has to mean that heaven forgot you. Maybe every hesitation was not divine timing. Maybe every pause was not a closed door. Maybe you have not been standing miles away from what matters. Maybe you have been standing at the final inch, waiting for certainty that was never meant to come before movement. That possibility changes the question you need to ask tonight. Do not ask only, when will God send it? Ask, what have I already been shown that I have not acted on? That question feels uncomfortable because it returns responsibility, but it also returns power. If the next step already has a shape, then you are no longer helpless while you wait. There are 3 layers to this pattern. The first is why clarity disappears. The second is why sincere people confuse hesitation with discernment. The third is why knowing what to do can still fail to become consistent action. The third layer is where this message turns. Before we reach it, I want you to make one quiet decision. For the next few minutes, do not search for another sign. Do not compare this message with 10 others. Just notice where your mind becomes clear and where fear immediately tries to rewrite that clarity. If you are ready to look without running, say it within yourself, I hear the call. Chosen one, once you notice the receiver gap, you begin to see how often it appears in ordinary moments. It does not always arrive as panic. Sometimes it looks like one more search, one more opinion, one more night spent thinking about a decision you understood clearly in the morning. There are signs that this pattern may be active in your life. Clarity comes when everything is quiet, but disappears when you begin to analyze it. You ask several people the same question, hoping one answer will remove all risk. You may notice something stranger. You can handle routine tasks for hours, but the moment you sit down to do the thing that truly matters, your energy collapses. The email stays unsent. The application remains unfinished. The conversation gets moved to another day. You are doing everything around the one thing that carries weight. Then another sign appears. You feel that something is changing, but you do not know how to prepare. So you gather more information. You listen to more voices. You ask God to make the answer louder. Yet the more you collect, the harder it becomes to hear the simple instruction already beneath the noise. Picture a quiet room late at night. Your phone is face down. Nobody is asking anything from you. For one clean moment, A decision appears. It feels calm. It feels responsible. Then morning arrives, and fear brings a courtroom into your head before your feet touch the floor. Suddenly, every outcome needs examination. Every risk demands an answer. The decision that felt clear hours earlier now feels dangerous. So you postpone it, and the postponement gives temporary relief. That relief can be mistaken for peace, even when nothing has actually been resolved. This is why the absence of movement does not automatically mean the absence of direction. Sometimes direction has already appeared, but it cannot survive the noise that follows it. That distinction changes how you interpret hesitation. You stop treating every pause as a message from heaven. This does not mean every delay is fear. Sometimes waiting is wise. Sometimes the responsible action is to remain still. The goal is not to force movement. The goal is to learn the difference between stillness that clarifies and avoidance that numbs. Ask yourself one simple question. When I become quiet, does the next step become clearer or more confused? If quiet keeps revealing the same responsible action, but noise repeatedly talks you out of it, pay attention. That pattern deserves more honesty than another search for signs. The skeptic in you may ask whether this makes everything psychological. It does not. Faith, circumstances, health, relationships, and the mind can all affect one another. The point is narrower. Your inner condition influences what you notice, what you dismiss, and what you can carry into action. So, do not diagnose yourself. Observe yourself. Notice what happens before clarity, and notice what happens after it. You do not need to solve the whole future tonight. You only need to see the pattern without protecting it. Remember this. The absence of movement is not proof that God has withheld direction. Sometimes direction is already present, waiting for a quieter receiver. Hold that thought, because next we stop naming the pattern and begin testing it in your actual life. Chosen one, now we test the receiver gap where it actually lives. Not in theory, not in a dramatic prophecy, in the small space between what you already know and what you keep postponing. Name one area where clarity keeps appearing and disappearing. It may be a conversation. It may be a boundary. It may be a project or a decision you keep reopening. Do not choose 10 things. Choose one. Now name the symptom. Perhaps clarity arrives when you are alone, but doubt arrives when you imagine other people reacting. Perhaps you know what to do until you begin searching for more advice. Most people explain this by attacking themselves. They say they are lazy. They say their discipline is weak. Some decide that God must be withholding permission. But shame can become another hiding place, because it feels like an answer even when it does not explain the pattern. Here is the shift. Information does not automatically become integration. You can recognize a responsible step and still lose contact with it when fear creates too many competing possibilities. Knowing is not the same as carrying what you know into action. That is the hidden mechanism inside the receiver gap. The problem is not always that nothing has been given. Sometimes what has been given cannot remain clear long enough to shape behavior. When that happens, asking for more information can widen the gap, because each new voice gives fear another place to hide. For the next 24 hours, try one practice. I call it the no new sign rule. For one issue that is already clear enough to name, do not search for fresh confirmation. Do not ask 5 more people. Do not consume another message hoping it removes every risk. Let the existing signal stay still long enough for you to examine it. Write down 3 questions. What do I already know? What is the smallest responsible action I can take? What am I afraid will happen if I take it? Answer them in plain words. If you fear rejection, write rejection. If you fear embarrassment, write embarrassment. If you fear being wrong, write wrong. This is not a command to act recklessly. It is a way to separate information from avoidance. If the next step is unsafe, dishonest, harmful, or beyond your responsibility, do not force it. But if the step is small, reversible, responsible, and repeatedly clear, notice how often your mind still demands impossible certainty. Now imagine tomorrow morning. You wake up and resist the urge to check 10 sources before touching the one task that matters. You sit down. You know the first step. You do not know the entire road, but you no longer require the entire road. For the first time in a while, clarity becomes something you can use. That is the vision I want you to hold. A quieter transformation is enough. One clean priority, one responsible movement. One day in which fear does not get unlimited votes simply because it speaks loudly. If you have been telling yourself that God is silent, consider another possibility. Maybe there is already enough direction for the next inch, but your attention has been trained to ignore anything that does not arrive with total certainty. That is not condemnation. It is an invitation to listen differently. Say this slowly within yourself. I receive with clarity. I do not need another sign to avoid the step I already understand. I do not need perfect certainty to make one responsible move. I can remain prayerful without remaining frozen. I can be humble without surrendering my capacity to decide. Hold that declaration for a moment. The receiver gap is only the first layer. The next layer is more deceptive. It appears when preparation itself becomes the hiding place, when more prayer, more searching, and more information begin creating less clarity instead of more. That is where the more is more trap begins. Chosen one, there is another trap that appears after you begin seeing the receiver gap. It feels responsible, it feels spiritual, it often sounds like preparation. You tell yourself that if one message helped, 5 more will help even more. So, you add another prayer routine, another journal prompt, another voice to follow, another opinion to compare. You keep collecting because collecting feels safer than choosing. But there is a point where more input does not create more clarity. It creates more noise. I call this the more is more trap. It begins when preparation stops serving action and starts replacing it. The mind becomes crowded with possibilities. Every new idea competes with the last one. Every new opinion weakens the signal you had before you asked for help. This is where sacred subtraction becomes necessary. For the next day, remove one source of noise. Not everything, just one. Stop checking one feed. Pause. One stream of advice. Leave one opinion unheard long enough to notice what remains when the room becomes quiet again. You are not rejecting wisdom. You are testing whether wisdom can breathe. Sometimes the clearest answer has been present for days, but you have buried it under so many confirmations that you no longer trust anything unless it arrives from outside you. There is another reason this matters. Over the past few years, researchers studying the human mind have kept returning to a question that sounds surprisingly close to what we are discussing. Why can a person know what matters, yet struggle to hold clarity long enough to act on it? I am not going to name the resource connected to that question yet. I am not going to ask you to buy anything right now. I want you to understand the problem before you hear about any possible tool, because a tool without context becomes another object added to the pile. What caught my attention was not a promise of instant genius. It was the idea that mental fog can have more than one address. Some fog comes from stress, some comes from exhaustion. Some can involve the way attention and different mental processes fail to work together cleanly. The product team behind the research direction we will return to connects its explanation to work on the 2 hemispheres of the brain and to the legacy of Nobel Prize research on split brain function. That does not mean a sales claim becomes proof simply because a famous study exists. It means the question deserves careful attention. Later, I will show you what they built around that idea, what they claim it is designed to support, and why it takes only 8 minutes a day to use. Before that, you need to see one more pattern, because without it, even the best tool becomes another way to avoid the real decision. So hold this question. What if the fog you have been spiritualizing has another address as well? And what if removing noise is not the end of the process, but only the beginning of learning how to move when clarity finally returns? Chosen one, now we arrive at a more difficult distinction. Sometimes waiting is faithful, sometimes waiting is wise, but sometimes waiting becomes a hiding place, and because it carries spiritual language, you can remain inside it for months without recognizing what happened. The symptom is simple. You already know the next responsible step, but you keep postponing it until you can guarantee the outcome. You want certainty before the conversation, certainty before the application, certainty before the boundary, certainty before you risk being seen. Then, you call the delay discernment. You tell yourself that if God truly wants you to move, every doubt will disappear first. But complete certainty is rarely available before meaningful action. Often, you receive enough light for the next step, not enough light to control the entire road. This is where fear becomes sophisticated. It no longer says, "I am scared." It says, "I am still praying about it." It no longer says, "I do not want to risk rejection." It says, "I am waiting for peace." The language changes, but the avoidance underneath can remain the same. Chosen one, this does not mean you should rush. It means you should test the quality of your waiting. Does waiting produce greater clarity, humility, and readiness? Or does waiting simply reduce anxiety for a few hours while the same decision returns tomorrow? Here is the tool. I call it the 1-inch test. Ask yourself, can I take one small, responsible, reversible step without needing the entire future explained? If the answer is yes, that step may tell you more than another week of speculation. Draft the email without sending it. Research the application before committing. Schedule the conversation without scripting every possible response. Give 30 focused minutes to the project you keep calling someday. A small action can reveal whether the path has substance without demanding reckless commitment. The veteran part of you may resist this. You may say, "I acted before and got hurt." That memory matters. But discernment was never meant to promise that you will never make another imperfect decision. You are allowed to correct course. You are allowed to learn after movement begins. One wrong door does not mean no door should ever be approached again. Mature faith does not require a perfect record. Imagine the difference this creates. Instead of standing still until fear becomes silent, you learn to move 1 inch while fear is still speaking. You do not obey fear, and you do not pretend it is absent. You simply stop giving it authority over every responsible experiment. That is the shift. Discernment tells you what matters. Courage carries it across the last distance. You do not need the perfect course. You need enough honesty to take the next responsible step and enough humility to correct yourself if new information arrives. Let the pressure come down for a moment. You are not being asked to solve your entire life tonight. You are not being asked to prove your faith. Breathe. Let your shoulders soften. 1 inch is enough when 1 inch is honest. Because the next threshold is where many people stop. They prepare almost everything. They understand almost everything. They can describe the calling, the problem, and even the solution. Yet they remain on the safe side of commitment. That is the last mile, and it is where this message turns. Chosen one, the last mile threshold appears when understanding is no longer the problem. You have prepared, you have prayed, you have gathered enough information to describe exactly what needs to change. Yet the final movement still does not happen. This is the strange point where insight can become another shelter. You understand yourself so well that understanding starts feeling like progress. You can explain the pattern. You can name the fear. You can describe the calling. But the door still waits for your hand. I call this the last mile threshold. It is the distance between discernment and commitment. The last mile is rarely solved by more information. It is usually crossed when a person accepts that clarity is valuable only when it eventually becomes a responsible act. Imagine a different morning. You wake up and choose one priority. You give it your clearest attention. You move 1 inch before the noise of the day rewrites the decision. That life is not dramatic, but it is powerful. Now I want to close a loop that has been open for a while. Earlier, I told you there was another possible address for the fog many people spiritualize. I waited because a solution only makes sense after you can see the full shape of the problem. You can now see that shape. The receiver gap explains why clarity disappears. The more is more trap explains why additional input can make the signal weaker. The 1 inch test explains how movement can begin without perfect certainty. But there is still one question left. Why does insight sometimes remain insight even after you understand all of this? Why can a person know what matters and still struggle to turn that knowing into steady action? The answer is not simply more motivation. It also involves the condition of the mind doing the receiving. So let us make the message plain. The why is this. You cannot use clarity consistently if your attention is scattered every time a meaningful decision appears. The what is equally simple. Reduce unnecessary noise, identify the next responsible step, and practice moving before endless analysis takes control again. The who matters most. You are becoming a responsible receiver. You do not wait for God to perform the part that belongs to you. You do not force every door either. You listen, you test, you act carefully, and you remain willing to correct course. Hold those 3 tools together. The no new sign rule protects existing clarity. Sacred subtraction reduces noise. The 1 inch test converts understanding into movement. None of them guarantees an outcome. Their purpose is to help you meet uncertainty with more honesty and less paralysis. And here is the contrast you need before we go further. Clarity can show you the door. Clarity cannot walk through it for you. The mechanism is clear. The door is visible. What remains is whether there is a practical way to support the receiver itself. That is where the research direction I mentioned earlier returns. The product team behind it points to work on how the 2 hemispheres of the brain coordinate, and they built a simple auditory routine around their interpretation of that idea. I will show you exactly what they call it, what they claim it does, and what the offer includes. But keep the order straight. The tool is not the message. The tool is not God. The tool does not choose your path. It enters only after the deeper work has already become clear, because no resource should replace discernment, responsibility, or the courage to take the next honest step. You understand the problem it is meant to address. The next part matters. We are not moving from spiritual truth into a random sales pitch. We are examining whether a practical support fits the receiver gap we have already named, and whether the claims deserve your attention. Chosen one, you now understand the problem this resource is meant to address, so we can look at the offer without turning it into a miracle, and without pretending that a tool can replace discernment, prayer, or responsible action. The product team connects its explanation to the work of Dr. Roger Sperry, who received the Nobel Prize in 1981 for research involving divided brain functions. Their sales material builds on the idea that the 2 hemispheres are designed to work together, and that coordination matters for mental performance. That historical research does not prove every claim made by a modern product. It is an anchor for the explanation they use. Before I name it, consider 2 stories presented by the product team. A woman from California described mental fog and a sense that life was happening around her while she struggled to feel present. According to her account, she later felt clearer and more connected to daily life. A man from Texas described carrying family and business responsibilities while feeling mentally dull and disconnected from his decisions. According to the seller, he later described his mind as clearer and more capable. Those are customer experiences, not guarantees. They show the kind of problem this product is positioned to address. The product is called the Genius Switch. The Genius Switch is a digital auditory routine developed by a team led by Dr. Daniel Barone in New York. The product page describes it as an 8-minute targeted auditory sequence designed around what they call neural sync technology and whole brain activation. The routine is simple. You use headphones, you close your eyes, you listen for 8 minutes each day. The seller says you do not need an additional meditation routine, mantra, or complicated practice to use it. This is not being presented as a generic relaxation track. It is sold as a specific auditory sequence intended to support coordination across the brain based on the product team's interpretation of research into hemisphere function. And this is where identity matters. The Genius Switch is not for everyone. It may fit the chosen one who understands that faith and mental clarity are not enemies, and who is willing to stop treating every moment of fog as a moral failure. It may fit someone who has done years of inner work, yet still feels that execution does not match intention. It may fit someone who wants a simple routine while still taking responsibility for choices and spiritual life. According to the offer information supplied by the seller, the product was listed at $49. The page being described offers it for $39 with lifetime digital access and 4 additional bonuses. Those bonuses include a guided visualization, a smart grocery shopping guide, a classic manifestation book, and a printable 5 Habits infographic. The seller also states that the purchase is backed by a money-back guarantee. Review the current terms on the official page before deciding. The seller says the $39 offer may increase. Treat that only as current offer information, not as a reason to panic. A good decision should still be a clear decision. Use the official page linked in the description and pinned comment rather than relying on similarly named third-party tracks. The exact offer, access, guarantee, and product details should be checked at the source. If this resonates with what you have been noticing about your own clarity, the description and pinned comment contain the official page. Read the details, review the guarantee, decide whether it fits you. The tool does not replace God. It does not replace obedience. It does not make the next decision for you. It can only be considered as one possible support for the receiver, while the responsibility to listen, test, and act remains yours. Chosen one, now we return to the deeper current. A tool can support clarity. It cannot surrender for you. It cannot make a boundary or take responsibility for the life you are building. This message was never meant to make a purchase, the proof of your faith. Buying something does not make you chosen. Refusing something does not make you rejected. Your worth is not measured by whether you use the resource I described. There is a final resistance hiding underneath many delays. It sounds like this. Maybe I ruined it. Maybe I missed my moment. Maybe somebody else was more worthy. Maybe heaven changed its mind because I was too slow. I call that pattern the unworthiness echo. It happens when uncertainty becomes evidence about identity. A door stays closed, and you decide you are the problem. A season lasts longer than expected, and you turn the delay into a verdict about who you are. But uncertainty is not a verdict. A delayed answer does not prove abandonment. A mistake does not erase your capacity to learn, and a season of fog does not mean the clearest version of you has disappeared forever. Look at how quickly the mind moves from facts to identity. The fact may be simple. The application did not work out. The conversation went badly. The project stalled. But the story becomes much larger. I always fail. Nothing works for me. I am not the one. Separate those two layers. Ask, what happened? Then ask, what am I making this mean about me? Those are different questions. The first can teach you. The second can quietly imprison you if you answer it from shame. The receiver gap becomes harder to close when every uncertain outcome threatens your identity. You begin demanding certainty because you are not only protecting a decision, you are protecting yourself from the possibility of feeling unworthy again. This is why responsible action requires more than clarity. It requires enough inner stability to survive an imperfect result. You need to know that being wrong about one step does not make your whole calling false. Imagine entering a relationship, a career move, or a creative project without eliminating yourself before life even has the chance to answer. You still prepare, you still discern, but you no longer use uncertainty as proof that you should disappear. And for the chosen one who felt something stir when the mind was mentioned earlier, the resource is still available through the description and pinned comment. That door is there if you want to review it. No pressure. No spiritual penalty if you decide it is not for you. What matters now is the threshold itself. You have named the receiver gap. You have seen the more is more trap. You have practiced the 1-inch test. And now you have separated uncertainty from unworthiness. So say this within yourself. I cross the threshold. I do not need a perfect outcome to remain worthy. I do not need endless signs to remain faithful. I can choose carefully, move honestly, and learn without turning every result into a judgment of who I am. Hold that for a moment. The final part of this message is not about another product, another explanation, or another piece of information. It is about helping your mind and body rehearse the kind of movement you have been avoiding, then sealing this message without fear. Chosen one, before this message closes, bring one unresolved doorway to mind. Not 10, just one. Let it be the decision, conversation, boundary, or beginning that has returned to you more than once. Relax your eyes, let your shoulders drop, take one slow breath. You do not need to force an answer. You are only creating enough quiet to notice what remains when the noise stops competing for attention. Now imagine a simple door in front of you. Nothing dramatic, no gold light, no promise of money, romance, or instant change. The door represents only the next responsible step that belongs to you. Notice your hand near the handle. You are not required to know what happens far beyond it. You are only being asked whether the next inch is honest, safe, and clear enough to take. Ask yourself one question. What is my next honest step? Let the answer be small. A message, a boundary, 30 minutes of focused work, a conversation scheduled. Place a hand over your heart if that feels natural. Breathe slowly. Feel the difference between urgency and clarity. Urgency says everything must happen now. Clarity says, this is the next thing, and I can meet it without abandoning myself. You do not need another dramatic sign to prove that you are seen. Release the need to be perfect. Release the fear that one wrong step destroys everything. Release the habit of calling shame discernment. Release the belief that uncertainty means abandonment. Let the receiver become quieter, because noise no longer deserves unlimited authority over your choices. Now, let this become your declaration. I am clear enough to take the next step. I do not need the whole road before I move 1 mile. I am not abandoned by uncertainty. I receive wisdom, and I accept responsibility. I can remain humble without remaining frozen. I can listen without disappearing. I can change direction without calling myself a failure. Chosen one. This is the threshold. Not a magical line where every problem vanishes. It is the moment you stop confusing endless preparation with obedience and stop turning every delay into evidence that something is wrong with you. Be grateful for what has become clear. Be grateful that responsibility is not punishment. It means choices are still available to you. And remember how this message began. 3 minutes were never the deadline. They were the invitation to stop running from the question. The clock was never the authority. Fear was never the authority. Shame was never the authority. The question is still here. What is my next honest step? You do not need to answer the entire future tonight. You only need to honor the next responsible inch. Let that be enough. Let clarity be enough for today. Let courage meet it there. And now that you can hear the question more clearly, the next step belongs to you.